Welcome into the 615 Sessions podcast. We got the main man. We got the OG, Jimmy Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com, hanging out here with us. And a week where we got to know some of the new Titans free agents, Jimmy. Obviously, I wasn't able to be in attendance with the radio show going on the way that it was, but good to see some fresh faces and certainly something that this team is going to have to do a lot more of heading into the 2023 season.
Yeah, and I think it's the first time I've ever been at one of these during free agency where you've got five guys back to back to back to back to back. I mean, usually they come in one at a time, just the way things transpired with the deals and guys come to town to pass a physical. I think the team, wanting to have them all pass a physical before they announced it just set the timing up where it was like a runway on Monday where one guy finished. Another guy was next up, and
I was looking at my phone. It was like 10 o'clock, 10:07. There was a new one.
Yeah.
I'm following all my Jimmy Wyatt tweets. Got him on alerts the way that you all should with this time of year.
Yeah, and I thought all the guys, starting off, I kind of go with the order of they went to the podium. Andre Dillard coming in from the Eagles, obviously a big hulking offensive lineman who's really looking for an opportunity. I think his spot's going to be at left tackle. He said that himself. We'll kind of have to wait and see what else happens this offseason and who he's going to be competing against. But I thought, he was a lot more soft-spoken than I thought, but I've heard really good things about him as far as the tenacity goes. Looking forward to seeing him compete. Arden Key, I'm already out of order. I think Daniel Bruskel was next, the big interior lineman for the 49ers. I think versatility is key for him. He played all over the line in San Francisco. He reminds me a little bit of a Ben Jones type with his mentality. I think he's going to be a starter at one of the guard spots. Luke Gifford, the Cowboys special teams / linebacker, hopes for a bigger role here. For sure, we know we're going to be able to count on him, making a lot of plays on special teams. And then Azeez Al-Shaair, I think, coming in here to replace David Long, and I think really kind of on the upswing in his career. He's a playmaking guy. He's a physical guy. He's someone who showed up with a lot of personality. And then speaking of personality, Arden Key, from Jacksonville, previously.
Thank God we've got a talker, Jimmy. Thank God.
He is a talker. Yes.
I was really worried.
He was very entertaining, and I think he's going to be good working alongside Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons and Nico Alter. We didn't get the chance to meet Sean Murphy-Bunting yet, who was announced later in the day from the Buccaneers. He brings in a lot of experience and has made some plays himself. So he adds to the competition at corner. So good groups. Good grouping there. Team's still not done. Maybe a lull here now before the draft starts, but I think you're still going to see this team address some other needs in free agency. It's just a matter of who and when.
Which one called Koharski fat?
Azeez did. It was funny. I listened to that, played that back again the other night because I was kind of telling my wife the story about all the guys, and Paul has done a good job. He's in that tribe. I think what is it? The Tribe Fitness?
Iron Tribe, baby.
Iron Tribe. Him and Bo Clear have done that and gotten some good payoff from that. So Paul's feeling good and asking him a question really about his playing weight and the size. And, guys who are maybe a little bit considered undersized don't like people asking them questions about their size. So it's kind of a defense mechanism. He kind of wanted to fire back and take a shot at Kuharski, and then said I'm not. I think he said I'm not as heavy or you, something like that. And that sparked Kuharski playing kind of like a carnival guessing game on what he thought his weight was, and then he guessed him at 210, and Kuharski's down to 185. And
210's more than me, Jimmy.
He went 220. He went 25 pounds over. He lost lost at the county fair, but so he had a personality himself, and it was pretty good banter there on day one.
Without question, Jimmy Wyatt's hanging out here with us as the comments start to roll in. The 615 Sessions podcast, by the way, presented by Two Rivers Ford, 2023 model year Fords, available right now at the dealership in Mount Juliet. Go to Two Rivers Ford for the best possible car buying experience out there. Looking at a couple of different things, Jim, because you brought up Daniel Brunskill and a Ben Jones type, right? I don't think I've talked to you in this kind of a setting since they released Ben, and you've seen the Titans locker room go through a variety of different iterations, right? When you're transitioning from one era where they tried to put a core together, it may have worked, it may not have, but at some point everything comes to an end, right? They have to transition into the next phase of whatever the franchise is going to be. And I think Ben is a significant enough move with the core of that locker room and how everything operates in there. David Long is another one. I mean, we've gone through this every year with Jarrell and Delaney and all these other guys who have moved on. Lawan is another big one. But the dynamics of, I guess, when you're covering a team like this one and you see it kind of go through these transitions, what kind of stands out when you're going from when you're experiencing that, when you're covering that in real time? Because that's something that you have experience with. Even though I've been here for 7 years, this is the first time that I'm really seeing that kind of a sea change.
Yeah, it's hard in some ways. I mean, you know how it is, Buck. You get to know these guys, and they get to know you, and there's expectations there on and trust built, and when guys leave that have been here for a while, it's almost like you got to start over from a reporter standpoint, and again building relationships with these guys and working with them from day to day. And I think Ben Jones and any guy who's been here a while, those guys talk in the locker room about who you can trust, who you can't trust. They give the lay of the land on everything. And so it's good to know people that know you. So when Ben Jones walks out the door, that offensive line group has lost a guy who's probably been the biggest influence on them, in 10 years. I mean, when Ben walked in the door, 2016, am I right on that?
Yeah, that's John's first year. So that would have been his first free agent, one of his first free agent signings. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's the tone setter in that room. And so I hate to see a guy like that go. I hate to see guys go who have been here a while, but it's all part of it. And it's, I don't know if I'll ever really get used to him. It's crazy now. I've been covering the team since 99 and, still remember, Eddie George and, Steve McNair and Derek Mason, and those guys weren't, left and they were replaced, and then years passed, and you've got other guys who you're just used to having around. They go, and then another group comes in, and now you got their sons playing in the league, whether it's Brad Hopkins or Chris Sanders, guys who've been coming out in the draft, John Runyon. So it's different, but it's all part of it, and the offensive line room. Since you asked me about Ben, I mean that whole personality is going to be different, because. Other guys going to be setting the tone and going to be following their leadership. And Ben is a great example for everyone else. And so when he leaves, it's tough to, it's going to be a tough act for somebody to follow.
Well, and that's, I guess how much does that stuff actually matter, right? In the grand scheme of things when they're blowing, they're not quite blowing it up, Jimmy, but like we're talking about, no Nate Davis, no Lawan, no Ben Jones. NPF is still there. Brewer's back on a tender situation. So some pieces and parts are there. But when you're going through as much change as they're getting ready to experience, because they've made a fair amount of cuts so far, does that necessarily like continuity matter that way when you know that somebody's going to step up into a role like that? And there are still some pieces in place. Jeff Simmons, who Kevin Byard, and we'll probably get to KB here in just a little bit. But like there are still those things in place to kind of hold it down. It's just, all right, cycling into the next version of who takes Ben Jones's place. I don't know if anybody's going to turn into quite the prankster that Ben was, but certainly from keeping things on the level and kind of keeping guys focused, it's not like there's a complete and total absence of that in the locker room right now.
Yeah, and the thing about Ben and is he is a guy who I think, he loved football. You hear Vrabel and you hear, whoever it is talk about guys that love football and hold each other accountable. When somebody like that leaves, then, you want somebody else to step into that role. And, if one guy, is maybe not putting forth the effort that position group likes and they're not afraid to call them out, it's good to have people like that on the team. I always thought Ben was that type of guy. And I think, probably Byard has always been that guy for guys in the secondary. So you need some more leaders like that to step up and establish himself in those position groups. And I think that's where it's going to make this offseason interesting, just to see how some of that stuff develops.
Devin Mills says, holy crap, Jimmy is on the show. Safe to say Jimmy is a legend, from Xavier Cohen on Facebook Live. Yeah, Jimmy is the Ben Jones of Titans media. When I used to show up hungover to practice, Jimmy was there to set me straight and demand better effort. So, yeah, we all need a Ben Jones.
Yeah. That used to be. That's funny. Talking about things changing over the years. Yeah, I go back when I first came in, and Buck, you've kind of grown up right before our very eyes here. But when I was a young pup when I first started covering the team, and yeah, I had some practices I showed up for. Wasn't feeling great. I know I had some Sunday morning noon kickoffs I showed up for after some big nights in New Orleans or wherever that might be.
We're going back this year, Jimmy. I've never been. You're going to show me we having hurricanes in New Orleans this year?
Oh man, I've recovered. I used to recover a lot better then than I do now. So yeah, it's I guess I've been around long enough to see a lot of stuff, and I got to pace myself better now.
Well, from talking about guys being around for a little while, Kevin Byard reportedly. Adam Schefter was out there saying that the franchise had asked Kevin to take a pay cut. Now, whether that's confirmed or not is not for us to necessarily debate here. We haven't heard from Rand Carthon or Kevin Byard at this point, but just in principle, Jimmy, when you talk about the kind of difficult business decisions that need to be made, there's nothing wrong in principle if they did, in fact, ask Kevin Byard to take a pay cut, because that's the job that they're there to do. And I guess the way that I was kind of processing it on the radio show today for people is, there was a lot of interest in having a fresh set of eyes on this thing, whether that's general manager, offensive coordinator, whatever role that people were discussing and kind of looking at different candidates, different options for in the offseason. And when you have a fresh set of eyes come in here and theoretically look around and say, okay, well, just because this guy has been a good player for a really long time, was a good player last year, the contract situation is what the contract situation is, and this new person is coming in here to make sure that they can get this thing right. What they've reportedly asked Byard to do does not go, like, people shouldn't be mad at the organization for taking that step. It's what happens after the fact that I think is going to be interesting to a lot of people.
Yeah, and that is what's interesting because through this process, we all know how popular Kevin Byard is. I mean, that's one thing everybody agrees on, is that he's been a great representative for the Titans organization, not only on the field, but in the locker room. So when that came out, I mean, he was universally defended, and people can't understand why you would even approach a guy like that for an adjustment on his salary. And I don't know what it was exactly, and I haven't talked to Rand about myself. I'll be in Phoenix for the owners' meetings this, leaving on Sunday. We'll be out there, and I'm sure Rand and Mike are going to be asked those questions. So I myself am curious to see what they say. But as you mentioned, what's going to be interesting is what happens from here, because if he was, in fact, approached and asked to take a pay cut, and Kevin Byard says what Adam Schefter and some others have reported, he says, well, I don't think my play, has warranted that I need to take a pay cut. Then what? I mean, because you don't really approach him and ask that question and then him say no, and then you say, okay, well, we thought we're
all good, baby.
Yeah, so that's not how it works. But now it's just a matter of what you do to kind of smooth things over, or what the team wants to do moving forward, and what it foresees for Kevin Byard moving forward. So I myself am interested to see how that all plays out. I mean, and again, no one on this team does not like Kevin Byard. I haven't met one person through this process that said anything bad about Byard, but this is part of the business. And when you have a new GM, you have to make some decisions, and you have to understand that, Rand, again, I think he's doing that while communicating with others as well. I mean, that's been very clear from the beginning. This is going to be a collaborative process. So I think, I don't know how it all went down, but certainly I don't think he just came in here and just started looking at the roster and say, okay, let's do something with this guy.
Let's go after the safety with a $19 million cap hit, according to Over the Cap. No, that's and the designations. If any kind of transaction was to occur, The designations on that would be important pre-June 1st or post-June 1st for those of you paying attention to salary cap savings. With all that being said, Jimmy, we're still in free agency. Free agency isn't done by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's technically been only allowed to go on for a week, and we've seen a lot of needs addressed. But given the signings, the 6 players that we went through at the top, does that change any kind of emphasis that they need to have on a certain position group at 11 overall? Because 2 offensive linemen theoretically to start, or at least that are capable of starting, at least in one, Brunskill. We don't necessarily have the sample size on Dillard to this point, but should that change their priorities in the first round, or can they now have a little more flexibility to go best player available if that's the strategy that they choose?
Well, it's funny. I was on a conference call with Mel Kiper this morning, and with those, you just sometimes you get called upon when you put your hand up. Other times you don't. I was fortunate enough to get called upon and ask him about the Titans at number 11, and that's what he said. He thought because of what they've done in free agency, that they're in a position where they can pick the best player available in the draft. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. I mean, because I think
don't believe best player available at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily believe that what they've done so far changes your approach in the draft, because yes, a lot of people had the Titans tab to pick an offensive lineman at number 11, and because of Dillard coming in, maybe you don't need a left tackle as much as you did, but I still think everything is on the table when you head into the draft, and I think. And that goes for positions, and it's just a matter of when guys are picked. I mean, this draft is tricky because all of a sudden now you got, I think, 4 quarterbacks potentially going in the top 10, and that's going to have players fall to you that maybe you wouldn't have thought ever been in a position to get. And certainly, we all know how crazy things happen in the draft. Some guys will fall that you don't expect to be there. So. I don't think what's happened so far is going to keep the Titans from going somewhere else in the draft. I still think it's a wild, wild west situation where it's come draft night and anything can happen.
Jimmy, are you going to the draft?
I am planning to go to the draft. You always go, and so I'm planning on going to Kansas City. In the event the Titans, it's always great access the day before because you get to talk to all the prospects, but then. For me, to be there in the event the guy's picked and be able to talk to him right after it, I think you get you get a big payoff there. And I've been fortunate enough going to previous drafts where I was there when Jack Conklin was picked, and there when Corey Davis was picked, and there when Adoree Jackson was picked. And sometimes you go and you strike out. Last year I was at the draft in Vegas, and we all know what happened. A.J. Brown gets traded, Traylon Burks gets picked, and Traylon Burks is nowhere near Las Vegas, and I end up going. Could be the worst things than getting a free trip to Vegas, but certainly wasn't. Didn't have any Titans players hanging around. New Titans draft picks hanging around there. Hopefully this year picking 11, your odds are better.
I would think so. So keep an eye out for Jimmy going, guerrilla video camera style with on a golf cart with a prospect as he's trying to get the ball.
Yeah, that happened one time with Rashawn Evans. I
remember that. That's a specific example I'm citing.
Yes, and he FaceTimed Derrick Henry as I was sitting right next to him. So that was cool. But there have been other occasions, like I mentioned last year, where the guy wasn't there. And there was an occasion when the draft was here in Nashville, and I was down there at the site of the draft on Broadway, and Jeffrey Simmons was picked, and he wasn't there. So, it's kind of, you just have to hopefully get lucky this time.
Last one for Jimmy Wyatt, because he's a very busy man. Of course, you can check out all the work he does at TennesseeTitans.com. The mailbag at TennesseeTitans.com. Craziest mailbag question you've got so far this offseason, Jimmy. We'll keep it to this offseason. Boy,
there's been some crazy ones. I think the one that has become popular is Lamar Jackson, and I'm sure you've been getting a lot of that as well. That's kind of taken over the mailbag here in recent weeks. I don't know that that's crazy. I get it. I mean, I get the intrigue, and I've certainly am paying attention to what happens to him in Baltimore. whether anything develops with the Titans or not, I guess that you can put me in the skeptical part just because of the price tag with him and what you have to give up. But that's become a popular topic in the mailbag. But the mailbag has been great for people just sounding off. Like people, seem like they want to air out their frustrations in that thing, and sometimes I just let them vent.
It's always my favorite when there's a big long question for Jimmy Wyatt and it just says, "Thanks for your input, Jim and Fayetteville or wherever they're emailing from." It's a delight every time you open up the mailbag. You should keep tabs on everything that Jimmy's doing, new free agent interviews and reporting around that. TennesseeTitans.com for all the work that Jimmy's doing. And of course, the OTP. Jimmy appears on from time to time and everywhere. The man does not stop working. Great coverage from the owners' meetings, I'm sure, is coming your way as well. Jimmy, thanks for taking the time. I know you're back to back, bud, but it's always good to hang out a little bit.
Okay, Buck. I appreciate you